Resident Evil 9 hasn't been officially announced quite yet, but it's absolutely coming. I despise waffling, so these are the 5 biggest things we know so far about Resident Evil 9. In May 2024, a retail listing for Resident Evil 9 appeared on the website PlayAsia, as well as listings for Code Veronica, Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 5. Not huge news, a blip maybe, but it's the title for Resident Evil 9 that's interesting. Resident Evil 9 Revenant Shadows. It had cover art too, but it's almost certainly AI generated, so there's not much to glean from it. Moody guy, moody lighting, cityscape background, and as it's a placeholder, if this is genuine, it's still not a firm indicator as to what Resident Evil 9 could be about. There's a description as well in the now removed listing, stating that Resident Evil 9 Revenant Shadows is the latest installment in the iconic survival horror series by Capcom. This game continues the chilling legacy with a fresh story, new characters, and the return of familiar faces. Set in an expansive, terrifying world filled with new threats and mysteries, Revenant Shadows blends intense action, intricate puzzles, and the atmospheric dread that fans have come to love. You could replace Revenant Shadows with Resident Evil Village and this would still be an accurate descriptor, which is to say, this is nothing but purposefully vague filler. The name, mind you, now that's interesting. Biohazard, despite being a nod to the series' Japanese name, told us that Resident Evil 7 was about an outbreak, Village told us Resident Evil 8 was closer to a folk horror vibe, so Revenant Shadows brings to mind something completely different. Revenants are people that have come back from the dead, sometimes to avenge wrong done to them in life. Sucks to see people living out your dreams. So, the title could mean shadows, a poetic way to say memories potentially, coming back from the dead. Things that were long since thought to be gone reappearing and haunting the main character. Spooky. Resident Evil 9 could incorporate almost Silent Hill-like psychological horror, similar to the tone of PT with Lisa haunting your every step, but with Umbrella behind it because, come on, this is still Resident Evil. Resident Evil 7 did play with a personal kind of horror, first person, hallucinations thrown into a fractured family, all themes which, as I'll explore next, the game's director Koshi Nakanishi is very interested in. In Capcom's next broadcast, Resident Evil 9 was finally announced by Koshi Nakanishi, director of Resident Evil 7. One can safely assume he's directing the 9th installment from this remark he made shortly afterwards. He said, "It was really difficult to figure out what to do after Resident Evil 7, but I found it, and to be honest, it feels substantial. I can't share any details just yet, but I hope you're excited for the day I can." Nakanishi directed Resident Evil 7, which is excellent news for those of us who loved, or feared, as our frayed nerves will testify, Resident Evil 7, but at the end of the day, when it comes to horror, isn't that just the same thing? Nakanishi's record with Resident Evil 7 speaks for itself. He hasn't directed a Resident Evil game since then, so we could assume that he's been working on 9 for the last 8 years, since the final bit of Resident Evil 7 content came out in 2017. Looking to past interviews with Nakanishi, there are tons of clues about what we could expect in Resident Evil 9. Claustrophobic, relatable horror, for one. In an interview with Forbes, Nakanishi said that he thinks the more personal horror becomes, the scarier it becomes. This comes from the fact that it's easier for the player to imagine themselves in that circumstance. And that's what we got in Resident Evil 7. Nakanishi's type of horror is character-centered, personal horror where, as he says himself, fear comes from a person's imagination. He says it creates deeper immersion and impactful storytelling, and this gives us a slight indication of what kind of treatment Resident Evil 9 could be getting. Glimpses of movements in the shadows, far-off noises, elements that mess with your head. Resident Evil 7, especially to start with, was all about keeping you so tense that every creak of the Baker Mansion's floorboards and narrow corridor made you absolutely petrified that Jack was just around the corner. In fact, if Nakanishi had his way, there would have been even more bakers for us to face in Resident Evil 7. When asked what he would change about Resident Evil 7 if he could, Nakanishi said he'd want to increase the number of family members in the Baker family. Maybe if Zoe had a boyfriend living in the household, Marguerite's little sister moved back in after a divorce, or maybe even a pet would have been fun to design and create. While yes, this does mean more enemies, this also means more characters, which is where Nakanishi's horror lies. Nakanishi's enemies are never just scary entities. In Resident Evil 7, each one had a personality and background that informed the monster they had become. Marguerite and her maternal instinct towards her insects. Jack's firm hand as the family's patriarch. Evie being childish and desperate for a family. Each quality indivisible from how they behaved once they were infected with Evie's mold. All of this bodes very well for Resident Evil 9. Character-driven horror brought us Little Nightmares, Silent Hill, and Outlast. Tense, vulnerable horror that isn't just about scares per se, but where the scares come from, the characters. So, pair that with the alleged, potential unconfirmed title of Revenant Shadows, and you have a pretty firm argument for Resident Evil 9 being less action horror and more, oh god, is my mind playing tricks on me or is that just my trauma horror? And with Resident Evil, it's both. It's always both. The RE engine was created specifically for Resident Evil 7, and it's been incrementally improved since then to incorporate elements suggested by Capcom's own developers, most notably for Capcom's Monster Hunter Wilds. This is a very useful way to benchmark what the RE engine is capable of, and therefore what features could potentially, allegedly, theoretically, be in Resident Evil 9. So, Monster Hunter Wilds aims to create a realistic ecosystem. Yuya Takuda, Monster Hunter Wilds director, explained that this enabled monsters to interact with each other, predator stalking prey, freely moving around the map. With rumours that Resident Evil 9 is going to be open world, which I am skeptical of, but let's run with it, this could translate into threats having more freedom of movement around the map. Hypothetically, if you apply this to Resident Evil Village, instead of Moreka appearing at scripted places in Castle Domitresk, they would appear in the village square too, moving around to follow Ethan's scent, and be seen fighting with the transformed Lycan villagers. Monster Hunter Wilds' seamless world was also a first for the engine, which lends itself to a horror game that doesn't require loading screens in between areas, meaning that tension never has much time to entirely dissipate. Unless you find the safe room and cower in there before psyching yourself up to go back into the fray, which I wouldn't know anything about. Capcom dropped a wry teaser for Resident Evil 9 in April 2025, in the form of this janky wooden sign, which, if you look at with your neck craned, looks like Roman numerals for the number 9. Sticking with Roman numerals is significant, as Roman numerals are a common factor in the modern Resident Evil games. Biohazard and Village have both had Roman numerals as a key part of their branding, so let's assume Resident Evil 9 will follow suit. Let's also assume Resident Evil 9 isn't gonna have any of the cliched video game subtitles, Origin, Chronicles, Beginning, etc, etc. Which means, as IX doesn't fit neatly into Resident Evil unless you get a bit sloppy with it, the title could be... Phoenix, Elixir, and Crucifix seem like the most viable options, as they sound titly. Titly basically means I can imagine seeing any of these on the box art. I know, the technical standards I use to assess titles are very impressive. Phoenix is the one that jumps out to me the most, as along with the alleged subtitle of Revenant Shadows, maybe an internal codename, they both evoke the theme of rising from the dead / ashes. What do you think? Will IX be in the subtitle of the game, or in the Resident Evil bit of Resi 9 itself? Capcom's recent investor call gives a strong indication that Resident Evil 9's release date is not before the 31st of March 2026. Their earnings forecast anticipated net sales of 190 billion yen, about $1.28 billion. Capcom Fighting Collection 2 and the Onimusha 2 Remaster are a big part of these projections for the 2026 financial year, as well as Switch 2 ports of games like Street Fighter 6 and Kinitsugami Path of the Goddess. For reference, in March 2022, Capcom revealed their net sales of 110.1 billion yen, about $846 million, thanks primarily to Resident Evil Village, which, as of March 2022, sold 6.1 million units worldwide. The latest numbers from March 2025 indicate that number has almost doubled to reach 11.3 million copies, with Biohazard having sold over 14.7 million copies as of March 2025. Bearing that in mind, although the projected net sales is without a doubt a gargantuan number, it's still below expectations if Capcom is including in that number a major franchise release like Resident Evil 9. So, it makes more sense to assume that Resident Evil 9 is almost definitely not coming out before March 2026, because otherwise those numbers would be significantly higher. Also, if a new Resident Evil was coming out before March 2026, then Capcom wouldn't have predicted catalogue sales, which are games that came out in previous fiscal years, to make up 85.2% of its sales. That number would be much lower to account for us masses buying Resident Evil 9 and shifting the balance of catalogue sales versus new sales. So, GTA 6 is coming out on the 26th of May 2026, and video game publishers are smart enough to steer well clear of anything that could clash with it. Safe to say GTA 6 is gonna take over the world for a good long while. So, assuming it's after March 31st, 2026, and avoiding late May, when could Resident Evil 9 be coming out? Either they could release Resident Evil 9 just before GTA 6, or release it in late 2026, probably October onwards, when a crumb of the hype around GTA 6 might have died down, but probably not. Yes, I know that's a great breakdown full of illuminating insights. Before or after May. Now I just need to narrow it down from 11 months to 1 day. I don't know when that 1 day is, so watch this space, I guess. What are you hoping for from Resident Evil 9? I'm so down for another tense Resident Evil 7 type resi in first person, with plenty of moments that will make me jump out of my skin and startle my beloved cats. I'm a walking stereotype, what can I say? Tell me in the comments what you hope appears in Resident Evil 9, and if this video taught you something new or made you think it's about time you got re-traumatized by Resident Evil 7, please do chuck this video a like and subscribe to Eurogamer for new videos about video games almost every single day. Now, I'm going to go and mourn Clancy all over again because he truly was the real MVP of Resident Evil 7, so I'll see you folks next time. But before you go, this is a shout out to all the stellar Xbox games you can get through Humble right now. Until the 23rd of May, you can get Xbox Game Studios Publisher Bundle for just $5, getting you Broken Age, Sunset Overdrive, and Battletoads. Pay just $10 more to get all of those games, plus Wasteland 3, Quantum Break, As Dusk Falls, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and Age of Empires Definitive Edition. Your purchase will support Gameheads, a non-profit helping train the next generation of game developers from underserved communities. So if you're tempted, now is the perfect time to give back.